Greetings, one and all, and welcome to my new series, Hideouts. This is all about gangsters' homes, their hideouts, and their families, and what they were doing with their lives. Today's special, very special gangster is Al Capone. A lot of people have heard of him, even people that don't know very much about mobster and gangster lore, so without further ado, let's begin his story. This is, as you saw, his Chicago home, where he lived with his wife and his son. We'll get into that in just a moment. Notorious gangster Al Capone was born Alfonso Capone on January 17, 1899 in Brooklyn, New York. Capone's parents, Gabriel Capone and Teresa Capone, a barber and a seamstress, immigrated to the United States from Naples, Italy in 1893. He was the fourth of 9 children. They were raised in Brooklyn, New York, and attended school there. Unfortunately, Al decided to strike his 6th grade teacher and dropped out of school. Yeah, in 6th grade. He began working a number of jobs, odd jobs like candy store clerk, pin boy at the bowling alley, ammunitions plant laborer, and a cutter at a bookbindery. Simultaneously, during this period of his life, Al was running with some kid gangs, children who would vandalize the community and commit petty crime. He soon became a part of an organized gang called the James Street Boys. This gang was run by notorious Johnny Torrio. Torrio would eventually become Al's mentor and encouraged him to become part of another gang he was involved in, the 5 Points Gang, at age 16. By the time Capone had turned 21, he had taken part in a variety of violent incidents. One such moment occurred in a fight with another young gang member named Frank Galluccio. Capone had his left cheek sliced open, thus prompting his later nickname of Scarface. He continued to become more violent and later had experiences such as killing someone he accused of stealing his craps game winnings and beating a rival gang member and leaving him for dead. He was a member of the gang called the White Hand, and their leader promised retribution. This was only the beginning of people coming after Capone for his damages. In 1909, Torrio moved to Chicago from New York and began running a brothel business with his big crime boss, Big Jim Colosimo. If you follow mob stuff, you might have heard of him too. Capone arrived in Chicago in 1919, and Colosimo was soon assassinated in order to make way for Torrio to begin running the crime family. Many speculate that Capone himself carried out that execution. Prohibition began, and the gangsters turned their attention to bootlegging operations, which brought in a tremendous fortune. Al Capone married Mary Josephine Coughlin on December 30th, 1918. She was also the daughter of immigrants and a hard worker. She had strong family values and was ready for children. Just a few short weeks before their wedding, they gave birth to their one and only child that lived, Albert Francis, aka Sonny Capone. Even so, the syphilis that May had contracted from Al, who had his share of mistresses, caused a number of stillbirths and miscarriages during their early married years. Albert entered the world with severe mastoid infection and had to undergo surgery, which left him partially deaf. In adulthood, Albert changed his name to Brown in order to delete the Capone legacy from his legacy. He lived until 2004 at age 85. May cooked and cleaned and provided a safe hideout for Al and his henchmen. She would gladly make homemade spaghetti for everyone in the wee hours of the morning. And God, what she must have heard. She never let journalists into their home and fiercely protected Al. When he was on his deathbed in Florida, she stayed by his side, despite everything they had endured and the rumors that were more than true. May made sure that Al was one of the first recipients of penicillin. When he died, May repeatedly told Sonny, Albert, not to be like his father, who broke her heart. She lived a modest life and passed away on April 16, 1986, in a nursing home in Hollywood, Florida. To continue with Al's story, in 1924, Capone murdered a man named Joe Howard, whom he accused of assaulting one of his friends. He'd gotten away with all prior assaults, but this time, an aggressive prosecutor attempted to indict him for the murder, and failed. Eyewitnesses feared Capone to a great degree and refused to testify against him. Later that same year, Capone and Torrio enlisted a former associate named Yale to help them assassinate another gang leader named Dion O'Banion. He was, planning retribution for the attempted murder hit on Torrio by Jaime Weiss and George Bugs Moran. In November of 1925, a man named Antonio Lombardo was named head of the Unione Siciliana, the Sicilian American Benevolent Society that was corrupted by gangsters. This enraged mobster Aiello, who was convinced that Capone was instrumental in Lombardo's ascension to the post, and that he was meddling in Sicilian affairs when he was not Sicilian. Who knew? He plotted to rub out Lombardo and Capone, making several unsuccessful attempts. Many attempts. The most interesting attempt was when Aiello offered money to the chef of Capone's favorite restaurant to put prussic acid in the soup of Capone and Lombardo. The chef, Diamond Joe, exposed the plot to Capone, and those who were trying to come after them ended up paying a dear price. Capone's loyal servants made sure that future assassins were gunned down. Aiello was eventually arrested due to an anonymous tip, and sometime later, while continuing to pursue Capone and rub him out, he himself was gunned down by a concealed sniper, and he passed away. Torrio ended up having a short prison stay and retired back to Italy. At this point, Capone becomes the crime boss of Chicago, involved in gambling, prostitution, and lots of bootlegging of liquor. He was expanding the territory over which he reigned by simply killing rivals and their gangs. Capone continued to go unpunished. He amassed a fortune by 1927, and Capone had an estimated $100 million. The biggest assault on another gang was the infamous Valentine's Day Massacre. Capone's men had rented an apartment across the street from a trucking warehouse and garage. Gunmen, disguised as police officers, were signaled. 7 members of Bugs Moran's gang were assaulted by a barrage of machine guns in the garage on the north side of Chicago on February 14th, 1929. Capone had an alliance with Mayor Thompson, but the horrible crime scene photos associated with his gang brought him much negative publicity and made people question his motives for donating to charities during the Great Depression. The mayor's opponent, Cermak, won the following election. Capone spent several months in the Eastern State Penitentiary in 1929, and after committing perjury and contempt of court, among a variety of other ridiculous efforts to stay out of prison, he was named Public Enemy Number 1. Here is a brief shot of his famous cell at Eastern State. In 1930, he was even chased to his Miami Beach home as authorities tried to run him out of the state of Florida. He fought some of the charges but lost, sentenced to 6 months, but remaining free while appealing the conviction. At one point, he even tried to run against Mayor Thompson in light of his great publicity. His ego was immense. The federal government had become involved and had Capone in its crosshairs. Publisher of the Chicago Daily News was a friend of recently elected President Herbert Hoover and enlisted him in help to take Chicago back from the hands of gangsters. It was the beginning of a multi-agency attack on the untouchable crime boss. Later that year, Capone served time in Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia for possession of a concealed handgun. On June 5th, 1931, after a lifetime of violent crime, Capone was indicted for 22 counts of federal income tax evasion from the years 1925 through 1929. He was further tried, along with several of his contemporaries, and found guilty of 3 of the 23 counts of conspiracy to violate prohibition laws for the years 1922 through 1931. He was fined and sent to prison for 11 years in the Atlanta penitentiary. It was May of 1932, and he was 33 years old. He was transferred to the brand new Alcatraz prison in August of 1934. By November of 1939, he was suffering from the effects of an advanced case of syphilis, enduring deterioration of his brain. He was released to a Baltimore hospital for treatment. He later retired to his enormous luxury estate in Palm Island, Miami Beach, Florida, on the Bay of Biscayne, where he died in 1947, weak and defeated from cardiac arrest. There's a picture of his estate. Pretty spectacular, isn't it? He made a great life for his family, although I guess you could take that in a couple of different ways. He gave them money. He gave them luxury. I don't know about their lives. Their lives were not great. So I did condense his volumes and volumes and volumes of details about his crimes and his life. And what I wanted to capture in the Sim part of this video is that he did have a somewhat normal home life behind the scenes. And even though there were mobsters invited over for dinner, there was a child there, there was a wife there. She was trying to make the best home for her family, even though her husband was a gangster. It was his job. She was giving him home and support for who he was and what he did, regardless of what that was. And I wanted to depict that a little bit as I built their modest home in Chicago. And yeah, that's what I got to say about it. So there are lots more details. I am going to include some links about Capone's life. As I mentioned previously, when I was kind of talking about this, there are a lot of conflicting details about his life in different accounts, different encyclopedia accounts, different websites. Will cite different dates or different facts. It's kind of confusing, but I think I tried to capture, kind of contain the information from all those places and come to a consensus. And that's what I reported on. He was an interesting person. He definitely had a slew of issues. Violent man, very little conscience to speak of, as far as I can tell. So do check out those links. There's a lot of a landslide of information about Al Capone. He really was part of pop culture. He still is. I think a lot of people really, in some way, idolize him, which is kind of a mistake. But, it wasn't glamorous what he did. And I do want to make that point. I'm not here to glorify anyone that committed murder. And he did so on a number of occasions. There are tons of crime scene photos for the St. Valentine's Day massacre, as well as other crimes, other victims of his, people with slugs through the head. I've got them up in my research right now, guys, and it's gruesome. It is gruesome. And he always had this kind of smirk on his face, like he knew something we didn't know. And, well, I think we do know. He was a murderer. So, unfortunately, his family did pay for that in a lot of ways. And it was good to know that his son, despite all of his suffering, was able to move on. There's a lot of information about both his wife, May, and his son, whom he called Sonny, in various locations on the internet. They're also very interesting and fascinating to learn about, and how Sonny went on to change his life and make it a point to live differently than his father, to be a good citizen and a member of society instead of this heartbreaker, as his mother called him. So yeah, if you want to look up the photos, be my guest. There are plenty of them. There are a lot of photos of Al in various, states of, getting indicted, being approached in court, pictures of his scar on the left side of his face. Quite fascinating. Bet you didn't know that happened during his school days. Lots of cool stuff. There's even a picture of Capone in his coffin at the end. He looks pretty normal considering what kind of suffering he was in. So I'm rambling. Interesting topic. I'm really happy to have started this series and bring some light to this topic. I know a lot of people are interested in things like the mafia and these types of crime families, and hopefully I can bring a few details to light and also show behind the scenes that they did have families and children, and we never think about them. We think of them, as an afterthought, but they existed and they lived through this. So much respect to them and their descendants. And hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. So we're going to be watching this video for quite a bit longer. There's a lot to do in this house. I think Sunny's room is probably the most fun. And then we're going to make the family. So if you're interested in seeing that, stay tuned. I wanted to make it a point not to talk for the entire video, and I have succeeded. So I hope that you guys are doing well, that you are happy, safe, and very healthy, and that you have a beautiful day.